Hi, ladies. Happy end of week 6, beginning of week 7. So, a couple things that I've been thinking about this week as we read through some more of these difficult passages in the letters. It seems to me that both in the passages we read last week and the ones we read this week, that there are a couple of common threads that are woven through these passages, and they're threads that Dr. Nicholson has brought out at different points in her exposition. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple of those and then just ask us maybe one reflection question. So, one of the things that strikes me, particularly in First Peter, but also in the passage in Titus that we read this week. So, whether Peter's writing or whether Paul is writing, one of their central concerns in these letters where these passages about women appear, one of the central concerns is the witness of the church. These small house churches, how are they going to be seen by the larger culture that surrounds them? And so there's this concern that the behavior of church members, whether that's their behavior in public worship or whether that's the public and visible piece of their marriage relationship, but all of that public behavior should be such that in that context, it doesn't scandalize or give rise to gossip or put up barriers to the gospel. So a lot of the very specific instructions that are being given, not just to wives and husbands or men and women in these letters, are for that reason, that the apostles are concerned that these groups of believers have the kind of witness that will not put up obstacles to the gospel between them and their neighbors in that cultural setting. And then the second thing that runs through all of these passages, both last week and this week, and Dr. Nicholson, like I said, has highlighted this a couple times. The qualities, the character qualities and the behaviors that Paul and Peter are commanding for Christian wives are qualities and behaviors that elsewhere they command for all believers. So it's not like the apostles have this set of female commandments, and these are commandments that are applicable only to women. No, that's not what's happening here. There is a way of being Christian that is common to all believers. But what happens is, in specific cultural contexts, women will apply that or live it out in particular ways. So there aren't female commands and male commands. There are just Christian commands. But there may be, at times, gendered ways of living those out depending on the cultural context. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple of those from our reading this week. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21. The overarching command to all believers in Ephesus, before Paul ever launches into men and women, masters and slaves, etc., the overarching command is be subject to one another or submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And right there's the key. That's how you do it, and that's why you do it. But the overarching command is all believers submit to one another. So that's the general imperative. That's the general command of that entire section. And then he goes on and particularizes it. This is what it looks like for wives. This is what it looks like for husbands, for slaves, for masters, for parents, for children. And one thing we also need to notice about the passage in Ephesians is that that particular passage is for marriages where both believers, both spouses are believers. So this is a Christian marriage. This is how a Christian wife relates to a Christian husband and vice versa. In 1 Peter chapter 3, we have a little different scenario. When Peter encourages women to have a gentle and quiet spirit, well, that sounds an awful lot like Jesus, whom we are all to be emulating and imitating. And when he tells husbands to treat their wives with respect and consideration, again, that sounds an awful lot like the way Jesus engages with human beings. So again, these are not female-male commandments, but female and male applications of a way of being that should characterize all believers. Now, the thing that's different in 1 Peter from the Ephesians passage is that Peter is giving commands to people who are married to unbelievers. So these are very specific and explicit situations. If a wife in that context is married to an unbeliever, what is it about her living out of the faith that will be winsome to that unbelieving husband? And if a Christian husband is married to an unbelieving wife, what kind of behavior and conduct on his part will draw her towards the gospel? So again, these are linked to witness, just as we saw earlier. These are Christ-like qualities, and that is the same concern that we see in Titus. So I think it's important for us to get the big picture into which we set these smaller passages. And one of the most impactful lines for me this week from the study guide was on page 69. If you have the study guide, this is where Dr. Nicholson was engaging with the passage from Titus chapter 2. And she's talking particularly here about Paul's advice to older women. And she puts it in such a keen way, I think. She says these older women that he is addressing, should act in a way that recognizes that they are in God's presence and that their very lives belong to God. And so I would just ask us to focus on that line in our reflection. Wherever we are, whether we're married to a believing spouse or an unbelieving spouse, whether we're single, separated, divorced, whether we are still living at home under the authority of our parents, whether we're living on our own, think about the context in which we are women and in which we operate on a day-to-day basis. In those contexts, what does it mean for you this week to act in a way that recognizes that you are in the presence of God and that your very life belongs to Jesus? So things to think about this week. If you have comments that you want to share, feel free to put them on the page here and we can talk about them. God bless you.